Vigilante leader rode at night, until his own son lit the torch that burned him. He buried his wife with his bare hands, then strapped on his guns and rode into the night. Justice, he told himself, doesn't sleep. But grief does. And it dreams in blood. The desert didn't care if a man was righteous or ruined. It baked his boots, cracked his lips, and swallowed his prayers whole. Silas Creed knew that better than most. He'd buried his wife, Miriam, beneath a crooked mesquite tree 10 miles west of Redemption Creek. No preacher, no hymn, just the wind keening through the branches like a child left alone. Fever took her. Quietly. Cruelly. While he was off chasing a horse thief who'd stolen oats from a widow's barn. He came home to cold hands and colder silence. Her last breath had fogged the windowpane. He wiped it away with his sleeve and never cried. Not once. Not then. Not ever. Grief, he decided, was a luxury for men who still believed in mercy. By moonrise, he'd saddled his buckskin mare, strapped twin colts to his hips, and ridden into the black. He didn't chase the thief anymore. He chased the rot in men's hearts. The kind that let children starve while saloon pianos played. The kind that laughed while widows wept. He became the shadow that slipped between towns, the whisper mothers used to hush crying babies. Hush now, or the night rider'll hear ya. They didn't know his name at first. Just the shape of him, tall, gaunt, eyes like flint, a duster coat stitched with bullet holes and silence. He didn't arrest. Didn't warn. He judged. And his sentence was always the same, a rope, a tree, and the slow creak of justice settling its bones. He hanged a man in Dustvale for beating his daughter with a branding iron. Left him swinging above the town well, a warning and a water stain. In Bleeker's Bend, he strung up 3 brothers who'd burned a family alive for their land deed. He made them watch each other die, one by one, under a sky choked with smoke and screaming crows. No trial. No jury. Just Silas, the rope, and the awful quiet that followed the drop. Townsfolk called him savior. Called him saint. Called him Satan with a saddle. Didn't matter. He rode on. Always at night. Always alone. The desert knew his scent, sweat, gun oil, and something older, the iron tang of a man who'd stopped asking God for help. But in a cabin tucked between Red Rocks and Rattlesnake Gulch, far from the gallows and the glory, sat a boy. Elias. 10 years old when his mother died. 12 now. Thin wrists. Quiet voice. Eyes too old for his face. He didn't ride with his father. Didn't clean his guns or polish his spurs. He sat by the hearth, knees drawn to his chest, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, and waiting. Always waiting. For hoofbeats. For shouting. For the creak of the door that meant his father was home, or worse, that he wasn't. Elias didn't fear the dark. He feared what his father brought back from it. Blood on his boots. Smoke in his hair. The hollow look in his eyes that said another soul had swung tonight, and Silas felt nothing. The boy learned to move like a shadow. To pour coffee without clinking the cup. To mend shirts without snapping thread. To hold his breath when his father stared into the fire, jaw clenched, fingers twitching like he was still pulling a trigger. Once, Elias found a sketchbook beneath his father's cot, filled not with maps or bounties, but with drawings. His mother's face. Over and over. Smiling. Sleeping. Holding a loaf of bread. The last page showed her grave, and beside it, a noose. Elias didn't tell. He hid the book again. But he remembered. And he began to write. Not stories. Not letters. Truths. Small ones at first. Father came home with mud on his left boot and blood on his right. He didn't eat supper. Just stared at Mama's empty chair. He cried last night. I heard him. But only because the wind stopped blowing. Elias wrote by candlelight, hunched over a school desk salvaged from a burned-down church. He used charcoal when ink ran out. Scratched words into bark when paper vanished. He didn't write to be read. He wrote to stay sane. To remember his mother's laugh. To remind himself that men could be gentle. That justice didn't always taste like gunpowder. But the desert has ears. And secrets don't stay buried long. One evening, as Silas cleaned his revolver at the table, Elias dropped his pencil. It rolled across the floorboards, stopping near his father's boot. Silas looked up. Not angry. Not even curious. Just, empty. What are you scribbling over there, boy? Elias froze. Nothin', Pa. Silas grunted, went back to his gun. But that night, after Elias slept, Silas crept to the desk. He flipped through the pages. Read the words. Saw his own name written small and trembling beside phrases like he smells like death and I miss mama's bread. He didn't burn the pages. Didn't yell. He closed the book. Placed it back exactly as he found it. And wrote out before dawn. Elias knew. He always knew. He found a single boot print beside his desk the next morning, too large to be his own. He didn't stop writing. He just hid the book better. And wrote darker things. By the time Elias turned 14, Silas had hanged 27 men. Some guilty. Some maybe not. The town of Mercy Flats threw him a feast, roasted boar, apple pie, a new duster stitched with silver thread. To the law of the night, they toasted. Silas drank 3 whiskeys. Said nothing. Rode out at midnight. Elias didn't go to the feast. He stayed home. Wrote a poem instead. They cheer the hand that holds the rope, but no one asks whose neck it broke. He didn't know it yet, but those words would be the first spark. The fire was coming. And his father was riding straight toward it. The first time Elias read his poem aloud, the schoolhouse went silent, not from fear, but from shame. And when his father found the pages tucked under his son's pillow, he didn't shout. He just folded them, and rode out without breakfast. Elias turned 15 the same week. A schoolteacher named Miss Lillian Harrow rode into town on a swaybacked mule, her spectacles fogged with dust, her carpetbag stuffed with dog-eared books and stubborn hope. She didn't flinch at the gallows tree on the edge of town, just stared at it a long moment, then straightened her shawl and walked into the one-room schoolhouse like she meant to plant roots. She taught fractions and frontier history, but she also taught something rarer, courage. Not the kind that fired guns or broke jaws, the kind that whispered truth when silence was safer. She found Elias's notebook by accident. Or maybe not. He'd left it open on his desk after writing late into the night, a poem about the hanging of Jeremiah Pike, a drunkard who'd stolen a loaf of bread to feed his starving sister. Silas had strung him up at dawn. The poem didn't call his father a monster. It called him tired. It called him hollow. It asked, what good is justice if mercy never gets a seat at the table? Miss Harrow read it twice. Then she closed the book. Didn't say a word. For 3 days, Elias waited for the scolding, the confiscation, the shame. It never came. Instead, on Friday afternoon, as dust motes danced in the slanted sun, she stood before the class, 12 ragged children with ink-stained fingers and hungry eyes, and said, "Today, we read something true." She didn't say whose. Just began to read. Softly. Slowly. Letting each word settle like ash. When she finished, no one moved. No one coughed. Even the flies stopped buzzing. Then little Mary Teague, whose father Silas had hanged for cattle rustling, started to cry. Quietly. Into her sleeve. Elias stared at his boots, heart hammering like a trapped bird. He expected fury. A slap. Expulsion. Instead, Miss Harrow closed the book, looked at him over her spectacles, and said, "Truth has weight, Elias. Don't ever be afraid to carry it." Word spread. Not loud. Not fast. But deep. Like water seeping into cracked earth. Women whispered it over washboards. Men muttered it over whiskey glasses. The blacksmith's son recited lines while shoeing horses. The preacher's daughter left a copy slipped under Elias's door. "You wrote this? It's beautiful. And terrifying." Elias didn't know whether to hide or stand taller. He chose neither. He kept writing. Louder. Sharper. He wrote about the boy Silas shot in Cold Springs, just 16, caught stealing a horse to escape an abusive uncle. He wrote about the woman in Bleeckers Bend who hanged herself after Silas executed her husband, left 3 children crying in the dirt. He didn't call his father evil. He called him blind. And the town, slowly, began to see. Silas noticed. Not the poems, he never asked, never read them aloud, but the silence. The way shopkeepers wouldn't meet his eye. The way saloon doors swung shut a little quicker when he walked in. The way mothers pulled their children inside when his horse clopped down the street. He blamed the teacher. Blamed the drought. Blamed the whiskey. Never blamed his son. Not yet. Then came the night Elias left his journal open on the kitchen table. Not by accident. On purpose. He'd written something new, something raw. "My father rides with ghosts. They whisper in his ears. They ride in his saddlebag. They sleep in his shadow. He thinks he's cleaning the world. But all he's doing is making more graves, and forgetting how to kneel beside them." He lit a single candle. Sat at the table. Waited. Silas came home just past midnight, smelling of smoke and sweat, his knuckles split and bleeding. He didn't speak. Just poured water into a tin cup, drank it down in 3 gulps. Then he saw the book. Saw the candle. Saw his son watching him. He walked over. Slow. Like approaching a rattler. He picked up the journal. Read. His face didn't change. No twitch. No flare of nostrils. Just stillness. The kind that comes before a storm breaks or a man dies. He finished. Closed the book. Placed it gently back on the table. Looked at Elias. "You wrote this?" Elias nodded. Silas didn't yell. Didn't hit. Didn't even sigh. He just said, "Get some sleep," and walked out. Rode out before sunrise. Didn't come back for 3 days. When he returned, he brought a new saddle. A new rifle. And silence thicker than desert clay. He didn't speak to Elias for a week. Didn't look at him. Just moved through the cabin like a ghost haunting his own life. Elias kept writing. Kept leaving pages where his father would find them. On his pillow. Tucked in his coat pocket. Folded beside his plate at breakfast. Each one sharper. Each one quieter. Each one heavier. Then came the sermon. Reverend Cole, a man who'd once blessed Silas's guns before a raid, stood in the pulpit one Sunday and read, not from the Bible, but from Elias's journal. A poem titled, "The Cost of a Clean Town." He didn't say who wrote it. But everyone knew. The poem asked, "How many sons must lose their fathers so yours can sleep safe? How many widows must starve so your pantry stays full? Is this peace, or just quiet violence dressed in lawmen's clothes?" Half the congregation wept. The other half stared at their boots. Silas sat in the back pew, hat low, hands clenched. When the service ended, he didn't shake the reverend's hand. Didn't speak to anyone. Just mounted his horse and rode west, hard and fast, like he was running from the words themselves. That night, Elias heard him pacing outside the cabin. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like a caged wolf. At dawn, Silas knocked on his son's door. Not hard. Just, there. Elias opened it. His father stood in the gray light, eyes bloodshot, face unshaven. He held out a small wooden box. Inside was a silver fountain pen, the kind city lawyers used. "You're gonna need better ink," was all he said. Then he turned and walked to the barn. Didn't look back. Elias didn't cry. Didn't smile. He took the pen. Wrote one sentence that morning, "He gave me a weapon. He just doesn't know it yet." The poems kept coming. Circulated in hushed tones. Passed hand to hand like contraband scripture. A farmer nailed one to his barn door. A widow stitched lines into a quilt. The town wasn't turning against Silas, not yet. But it was turning toward Elias. Toward the truth he was unearthing. Toward the mercy his father had buried under rope and rage. And Silas? He kept writing. Kept hanging. But his hands shook now when he tied the knots. His voice cracked when he read the charges aloud. He started leaving the bodies down sooner. Started muttering names under his breath, not the crimes, but the men. Jed. Tomas. Eli. Like he was trying to remember they were people. Not just sins on legs. One night, Elias followed him. Not close. Just far enough to see. He watched from behind a boulder as his father stood over a freshly dug grave, not a hanging, not this time. Just a shallow hole beside a creek. Silas knelt. Placed a tin cup and a crust of bread beside the body. Then he took off his hat. Bowed his head. And whispered something Elias couldn't hear. When Silas rode away, Elias crept forward. Read the crude marker, unknown. Hung for stealing medicine. Forgive us. Elias didn't write a poem that night. He wrote a letter. Not to his father. To the town. And he signed it. The next morning, copies were nailed to every post, every door, every church pew. It ended with, "If justice has no room for mercy, then it's just another kind of murder. And I won't watch my father become the very thing he swore to kill." Silas found one nailed to his own barn door. He read it. Twice. Then he tore it down. Didn't burn it. Didn't curse. He folded it. Carefully. Like a man folding a flag for a fallen soldier. And tucked it into his coat, right over his heart. The fire hadn't started yet. But the kindling was laid. And Elias? He was done hiding. He was ready to strike the match. He didn't bring a gun. Didn't bring a rope. Just a torch, a journal, and the unbearable weight of love turned to ash. The crowd didn't stop him. They stepped aside. And when the flame kissed the cabin wall, even the coyotes fell silent. The night Elias walked into Redemption Creek holding fire, the stars didn't blink. The wind didn't howl. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if the earth itself knew this was no ordinary burning. He wore his father's old coat, the one with the bullet hole near the shoulder, stitched shut by his mother's hands. In his left, he carried a kerosene-soaked torch, its flame licking the air like a living thing. In his right, he clutched his leather-bound journal, every poem, every letter, every truth he'd ever dared to write. His boots crunched on gravel. His breath came steady. Calm. Not the calm of a boy. The calm of a reckoning. Behind him, they came. Not a mob. Not a posse. Just people. The baker whose brother Silas hanged for stealing flour. The widow whose son died in Silas's raid on a so-called outlaw camp. The schoolchildren who'd memorized Elias's verses like psalms. Miss Harrow walked closest, her shawl pulled tight, eyes dry but burning. Reverend Cole carried a Bible, not to stop Elias, but to bear witness. No one spoke. No one tried to take the torch. They'd read the letter. They'd lived the cost. And now, they walked with the boy who'd loved the man they feared, and who'd chosen mercy over memory. The cabin stood at the edge of town, nestled in a crook of red rock and juniper, its porch sagging under years of silence and sorrow. Smoke hadn't curled from its chimney in weeks. Silas hadn't ridden out. Hadn't taken a bounty. Hadn't strung up a soul. He'd just stayed. Sat on the porch at dusk. Polished his guns with slow, tired hands. Watched the horizon like he was waiting for something, or someone, to come riding in and end it all. He saw them coming. He didn't reach for his Colts. Didn't shout. Didn't even stand. He just sat in his rocking chair, the same one Miriam used to mend socks in, and watched his son walk toward him with fire in his hands and grief in his eyes. The crowd stopped 20 paces back. Elias kept walking. Up the creaking steps. Past the rusted horseshoe nailed above the door, for luck, his mother had said. He stopped 3 feet from his father. The torch hissed between them, casting long, trembling shadows across Silas's face. Lines deeper than canyon cracks. Eyes hollowed by years of night rides and unmarked graves. Elias, Silas said. Just that. No anger. No fear. Just his son's name, spoken like a prayer he'd forgotten how to finish. Elias didn't answer. Not with words. He opened the journal. Flipped to the last page, a poem he'd written that morning, ink still damp. He held it out. Silas took it. Read it slowly. His lips moved silently. When he finished, he looked up. You always did write prettier than you talked. Elias's voice cracked, the first crack in his calm. I didn't want it to come to this. Silas nodded. Ain't about wantin', boy. It's about weighin'. And you done weighed me true. He folded the page. Tucked it into his vest pocket, right beside the letter Elias had nailed to the barn. Then he looked past his son, to the crowd. Saw Mary Teague holding her little brother's hand. Saw the blacksmith with his arms crossed, jaw tight. Saw Miss Harrow, standing straight as a pine, tears finally spilling. He gave them all a slow nod. Like a man acknowledging a jury that had already reached its verdict. He stood. Slowly. Stiffly. Like his bones remembered every mile he'd ridden, every man he'd buried. He stepped past Elias, not away, but toward the cabin door. Opened it. Stepped inside. Didn't close it behind him. Elias followed. The cabin smelled like old leather, cold coffee, and the ghost of Miriam's rosewater. The hearth was cold. The table was bare except for a single tin plate, a fork, and a framed sketch, Elias as a boy, smiling, holding a puppy. Silas walked to the fireplace. Took down a small wooden box, the one Elias's mother kept her letters in. He opened it. Inside weren't letters. Just 3 things, Elias's first poem, the silver pen he'd given him, and a lock of Miriam's hair, tied with blue thread. He placed them gently on the mantel. Then he turned. Looked at his son. You gonna do it? Elias's hands shook. The torch trembled. I don't want to. Then don't, Silas said softly. Walk away. Ride west. Write your poems in some town that ain't soaked in my sins. Elias swallowed. Tears finally fell, silent, hot. It's too late for that. The words are out. The fire's lit, even if I don't throw the torch. Silas nodded. Walked to his rocking chair. Sat down. Leaned back. Closed his eyes. Then do it clean, son. Don't make it suffer. Elias stepped forward. Raised the torch. The flame reflected in his father's closed eyelids, gold on gray. He hesitated. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then he touched the torch to the dry timber beside the doorframe. The fire caught fast. Hungry. Eager. It raced up the wall like it had been waiting years for this moment. Silas didn't move. Didn't open his eyes. Just sat there, hands folded in his lap, face calm as Sunday morning. Elias stumbled back, coughing as smoke filled the room. He turned to leave, then stopped. Looked back. Saw the poems. Dozens of them. Tacked to the walls. Taped to the windows. Pinned above the bed. All his. All written in his hand. His father had saved them. Every one. Elias choked. Turned. Ran. He burst out into the night just as the roof groaned. The crowd hadn't moved. They watched the flames climb. Watched the windows glow orange. Watched the silhouette of a man, still seated, still calm, fade into smoke and ember. No one cried out. No one prayed. They just stood there. Bearing witness. Letting the fire speak where words had failed. Elias dropped the torch. It sputtered in the dirt. He fell to his knees. Didn't sob. Didn't scream. Just stared at the burning cabin, at the man inside who taught him to ride, to shoot, to survive, and who'd never learned how to live. Behind him, Miss Harrow placed a hand on his shoulder. He knew, she whispered. He let you. Elias didn't answer. Couldn't. The fire roared. The timbers cracked. And somewhere inside, beneath the collapsing roof, Silas Creed, the night rider, the judge of the desert, the ghost who hanged ghosts, took his final breath not with a curse, but with his son's poem pressed against his heart. The cabin burned for hours. No one tried to stop it. No one dared. When dawn came, all that remained was ash, a twisted iron bed frame, and the stone hearth, still warm. And on that hearth, curled like a sleeping child, lay Silas's body. Charred. Quiet. One hand still clutching the scorched edge of Elias's first poem, the one about his mother's bread. They buried him at noon. No marker. No sermon. Just a hole in the red earth, deep enough to hold a man's regrets. Elias didn't speak at the grave. Didn't cry. He just placed the silver pen on the fresh dirt, and walked away. The town didn't cheer. Didn't mourn. They just exhaled. Like a fever had broken. Like a curse had lifted. But Elias? He wasn't done. He went to the church. Left his journal on the steps, open to the last page. A new poem. Written in ash and starlight. It read, I lit the fire that burned my father down, not for hate, but for the love he drowned. Let the West remember, law without grace is just a noose tied in a different place. I write now for the ones he left behind. The broken. The quiet. The hard to find. Mercy ain't weakness. It's courage, slow and deep. And sometimes, the son must make the father weep. By sundown, copies were already being made. By moonrise, they were being read aloud in kitchens, in barns, in jail cells. By midnight, Elias was gone. His horse was missing from the livery. His bed was empty. His desk, clean. Only the torch remained. Leaning against the church door. Still smelling of smoke. And waiting. They buried him without a stone, but carved his name into every conscience he'd broken. And when travelers ask what happened to the boy who burned his father, they point west, and whisper, "He's still writing. Just quieter now. The desert doesn't keep graves long. Wind scrapes them smooth. Rain washes names away. Animals dig. Roots crack. Time, out here, is a patient thief, stealing memory, stealing markers, stealing even the echo of a man's last breath." Silas Creed's grave near Redemption Creek vanished within a season. No headstone. No cross. Just a slight dip in the earth, barely visible unless you knew where to look. And fewer did. The town didn't forget him, not exactly. But it stopped speaking his name like a curse or a prayer. It just let him go. Like smoke. Like shadow. Like justice that finally ran out of rope. But Elias? He didn't vanish. He scattered. He became a rumor wrapped in dust, a man glimpsed at twilight mending a widow's fence in Bleeker's Bend, leaving a sack of flour and a poem tucked under her door. A stranger who paid for a child's medicine in Dust Vale, then slipped away before dawn, his horse's hoofprints already blurred by morning wind. A quiet figure seen kneeling beside fresh graves in forgotten churchyards, placing wildflowers and folded pages where no one would find them, except the dead, and the wind, and God, if he was listening. He rode light. Carried little. A bedroll. A canteen. A pencil stub. And always, tucked inside his coat, the journal. Not his old one. A new one. Bound in buckskin, its pages filled not with rage, but with reckoning. He wrote letters now. Not to the living. To the dead. To Jeremiah Pike, who stole bread for his sister. To Tomas Ruiz, hanged for a crime his brother committed. To Eli Granger, the boy shot for a horse he never meant to keep. He wrote apologies. Not for himself. For his father. For the town. For the silence that let it all happen. Dear Eli, I'm sorry they called you thief. Sorry they never asked why you ran. Sorry my father didn't see the fear in your eyes, just the guilt he needed to see. I leave this by your grave so you know, someone remembers you weren't just a name on a bounty poster. You were a boy. And you deserved more. He left them where the earth was soft. Where the wind might carry the words farther than his voice ever could. Years passed. 5. Then 10. The west kept turning. Railroads cut through canyons. Telegraph wires hummed with news of presidents and wars. Towns grew. Others died. Saloons became general stores. Gallows became lampposts. And the legend of Silas Creed, the night rider, faded into campfire tales told to scare children into obedience. You best behave, or the ghost judge'll come rope ya in your sleep. But even those stories grew thin. Forgotten. Not Elias's. Travelers spoke of him in hushed tones over campfires. A man who rode alone. Who never drew a gun. Who spoke only when spoken to, and even then, sparingly. They said he had eyes like winter sky, clear, quiet, holding storms beneath the calm. They said he could fix a broken wagon wheel with his hands and a broken heart with a single sentence. They said if you were starving, he'd give you his last biscuit. If you were lost, he'd ride with you till you found your way. And if you were grieving, he'd sit with you. All night. No words. Just presence. Like he knew the weight of silence better than most men knew the weight of gold. Some claimed he still wrote. That if you left a blank page on your porch under the full moon, you'd find it filled by dawn, not with judgment, but with comfort. A verse about your mother's laugh. A line about the way the creek sounded behind your childhood home. A reminder that grief doesn't vanish, it just learns to walk beside you. No one knew where he slept. No one saw him eat. He was there, and then he wasn't. Like a shadow that decided to stay just long enough to remind you light still existed. One autumn, a young deputy chasing cattle rustlers near the Rio Pecos found an old man sitting by a creek, mending a bridle with slow, careful hands. The deputy didn't recognize him. Elias's beard was gray now, his face lined like dry riverbeds, but something in the man's stillness made him dismount. "You seen any riders come through here? Rough lookin'? Armed?" Elias didn't look up. "Ain't seen no rough men. Just tired ones." The deputy frowned. "You live out here?" "Nobody lives out here, son. We just pass through." The deputy hesitated. Then, almost shyly, "You ever hear tell of a man named Elias Creed? Used to write poems. Burned his own father's cabin down." Elias's hands stilled. Just for a breath. Then he kept stitching. "Heard of him? You know where he is?" Elias finally looked up. His eyes, still that impossible blue, still holding galaxies of grief and grace, met the deputy's. "He's where he needs to be." The deputy didn't press. Just nodded. Mounted up. Rode off. And as he crested the ridge, he glanced back. The old man was gone. Only the bridle remained, neatly mended, resting on a flat stone beside the water. And beneath it, a single sheet of paper. The deputy rode back. Picked it up. Read it. Folded it. Tucked it into his coat. Didn't tell a soul. It read, "Son, you carry your father's name like a badge. Don't let it become a burden. Justice ain't about who you punish. It's about who you protect. Who you see. Who you let breathe. Ride easy. E." They say that deputy became sheriff. That he carried that note in his pocket till the day he died. That he judged with mercy. That he never hanged a soul. Back in Redemption Creek, the church still stands. Crooked. Weathered. But standing. And on its steps, every first Sunday of the month, someone leaves a new poem. No name. No signature. Just words, gentle, fierce, healing, nailed to the wood where Elias left his journal all those years ago. Folks gather. Read them aloud. Some cry. Some pray. Some just sit in the dust and let the lines settle into their bones. They don't know if it's Elias. They don't need to. They know what the poems mean. That mercy didn't die with Silas. That fire doesn't always destroy, sometimes, it clears the ground for something new to grow. That a son's love, even when it burns, can be the truest kind of redemption. And out there, beyond the mesas, beyond the railroad, beyond the maps, Elias rides still. Not hunting ghosts. Not chasing justice. Just, bearing witness. Writing the names the world forgot. Leaving bread where hunger lives. Lighting candles where the dark is thickest. He doesn't carry a torch anymore. He doesn't need to. The fire's inside him now. Quiet. Endless. And finally, at peace.